You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, 17th of September 2014. Police did not protect schoolgirl who was stabbed 50 times because mum was walking her home. Ukip accused of politicising child sex abuse scandal by blaming Labour. Rapist who can't bear prison to be euthanized. Spain to prosecute nationals who join ISIS. Germans increasingly carrying out IS suicide attacks. Cameron warned airstrikes on ISIS in Syria could be illegal. Assad writes letters to the US and asks for American cooperation in the fight against ISIS militants. China's central bank said to inject $81 billion into system. Thought for the day, what happens on the res stays on the res. And finally, the ups and downs of reaching the top of that hill. And I'm running up that hill, oh yes. UK news. Police did not protect schoolgirl who was stabbed 50 times because mum was walking her home. Police decided a choir girl did not need protection from her killer boyfriend because her mother was walking her to school, a court heard. Arsema Dawit, 15, was stabbed more than 50 times by Thomas Ngozi after she finished with him because of his controlling behaviour. Ngozi, who was 21 at the time of the attack, met Arsema at St Michael's Orthodox Church in Camberwell, south east London. She ended the relationship when he hit her in the face in a McDonald's because she said hello to a male school friend. Her mother, Izhanash Medhani, went to Kennington Police just over a month before the brutal killing, but Southwark Crown Court was told that officers took 2 weeks to interview Ngozi and were still investigating when Miss Dawit was attacked. Ngozi confessed but could not be tried after suffering a brain damage in a suicide attempt in prison. World at 8. This girl was underage anyway at 15 to be in a relationship. Ngozi should be deported. Why should we pay for him in prison or in Broadmoor? Ukip accused of politicising child sex abuse scandal by blaming Labour. Hayward and Middleton by-election candidate John Bickley claims party betrayed girls through love affair with immigration. The UK Independence Party is being accused of exploiting the scandal of sexual grooming gangs for political gain after the party's by-election candidate blamed the abuse of white girls, mainly by Asian men, on Labour's reluctance to upset immigrant communities. John Bickley, who is standing in the Greater Manchester seat of Hayward and Middleton, has used a campaign leaflet to accuse Ed Miliband's party of betraying working class girls and highlight Labour's love affair with immigration, political correctness and multiculturalism. His comments have drawn up new, racially charged battle lines in white working class seats where Ukip hopes to challenge Labour's dominance. The election is due to be held on 9th of October and Ukip hopes to overturn the 6,000 majority of the late Labour MP Jim Dobbin, who died last week aged 73. The Ukip leader Nigel Farage has pledged to fight hard in the seat where the British National Party previously won more than 3,000 votes. European news. Rapist who can't bear prison to be euthanized. Frank van der Bleeken, a Belgian man in prison for multiple rapes and a rape murder, has decided he wants to die and authorities have decided they can grant that request. Van der Bleeken, 50, has been in prison for nearly 30 years and has declined to seek parole because he believes his uncontrollable urges make him a danger to society. But he says he can no longer bear prison conditions and his own unbearable psychic suffering, AFP reports. I am a human being and regardless of what I've done, I remain a human being, he told Belgian TV. So yes, give me euthanasia. Authorities determined Van der Bleeken met the required conditions. He is conscious, capable and has expressed a voluntary, considered and repeated request to end his life. Lawyers for Van der Bleeken, who launched his legal fight for the right to die in 2011, say he will soon be transferred from prison to a hospital where he will be euthanized, the BBC reports. Belgium legalised euthanasia in 2002 and the procedure was carried out on a record 1,807 people last year. World at 8. Actually, I can understand this guy. He has served his time and feels he is not rehabilitated and cannot stand more prison. So in his case, death is preferable. Spain to prosecute nationals who join ISIS. Spain's foreign minister announced on Tuesday his government plans to amend the country's penal code so that Spaniards joining foreign conflicts and radical Islamic groups such as ISIS can be prosecuted on terrorism charges. José Manuel García Margallo outlined the measures in the Spanish Parliament on Tuesday in the wake of comments that Spain isn't cooperating enough in the international fight against the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. Spain has never been one to watch the bullfight from behind the barriers, Spanish news agency EFE reported him as saying. Margallo argued that Spain has already taken part in numerous missions abroad relating to what he called one of the most complex threats of our time, jihadi terrorism. We have been and we will be wherever our presence is needed and can be put to good use, he added. Margallo did not confirm when the criminal code amendments would come into force, but did highlight other planned anti-terrorism measures such as the use of US military bases in Spain and international counterintelligence collaboration. World at 8. The Spanish have suffered under the Moors before, so know what could happen. We could pass such laws here and extend them to the families of those jihadis and their so-called communities, alias deportation without appeal. Hit them where it hurts. Germans increasingly carrying out IS suicide attacks. Up to 9 Germans have carried out suicide bombings for the Islamic State terror group this year, a German research team reports. Berlin is weighing its response amid fears that the number could continue to grow. The German government is alarmed about a growing number of its citizens carrying out suicide bombings on behalf of the Islamic State, IS, in Iraq and Syria, reports a research team including journalists from the Süddeutsche Zeitung newspaper as well as German broadcasters NDR and WDR. The team says it could confirm 5 separate attacks by Germans and is currently looking into a further 3 to 4 incidents. Almost all of the attacks were carried out this year in Iraq, primarily the northern Kurdish region and Baghdad, claims the team in its report published on Wednesday. It further cites information from Western intelligence agencies that the number of suicide strikes carried out by Europeans has quadrupled since March, attributing the Islamic militia's increased deployment of Westerners in part to propaganda purposes. We don't want death being sent from Germany to Iraq. Exporting terror is unconscionable and must be stopped, said German Interior Minister Thomas de Maizière to the Süddeutsche Zeitung in response. World at 8. Do the Germans call their Germans Muslims or Europeans? We Brits call them British born. So are these terrorists of German blood or just birth? It does make a difference when deporting them, doesn't it? World News. Cameron warned airstrikes on ISIS in Syria could be illegal. David Cameron has been warned that UK airstrikes against ISIS in Syria could be illegal under international law. Officials in the House of Commons Library have cast doubt on the Prime Minister's view that ISIS targets could be bombed in Syria as well as Iraq on the grounds that the Assad regime in Syria is illegitimate. In a briefing paper for MPs, officials said action in Syria will be difficult to justify legally without a request for assistance from the Assad government, and it is unlikely that the West could be seen to be responding to such a request. The British government has said that any action in Syria will comply with international law, and the most likely way to achieve this would be to claim that military action for humanitarian purposes using the responsibility to protect doctrine. This remains controversial, however, without a United Nations Security Council resolution to authorise it. Barack Obama is expected to chair a Security Council session to discuss ISIS during the UN General Assembly in New York next week. Although the US President and Mr Cameron will use the meeting to lobby other UN members to join an international coalition against ISIS, a vote on military action is unlikely to be taken. Russia, an ally of Syria, could veto airstrikes in Syria. Philip Hammond, the Foreign Secretary, who said last week that the UK would not join the US in carrying out airstrikes in Syria, insisted today that no option had been ruled out. But he conceded that bombing in Syria would be an order of magnitude more difficult than airstrikes in Iraq for all sorts of reasons, military, legal and technical. World at 8. Do not bomb another country without the authority or help of that country's government. You don't have to be in the UN to know that one. It's a simple law of manners. Assad writes letters to the US and asks for American cooperation in the fight against ISIS militants. Syria has asked Washington to engage in military and intelligence collaboration to defeat their mutual enemy ISIS, inviting US congressmen and senators to visit Damascus to discuss joint action against the jihadis who threaten both America and the regime of President Bashar al-Assad. It's an offer that President Barack Obama will have to refuse, but not without some embarrassment. After deciding to bomb the forces of ISIS, which calls itself Islamic State, in Syria as well as in Iraq, Mr Obama was confronted by Vladimir Putin's warning that any such unilateral action in Syria would be an act of aggression. The US President will now have to explain yet again why he cannot collaborate against America's apocalyptic enemies with a Syrian regime which he has also sworn to overthrow, even though this regime is fighting exactly the same enemies. The letter to the US House of Representatives pointedly invites Congress and Senate members who last year condemned the Syrian government for chemical attacks in the suburbs of Damascus to collaborate to save Syrian and American lives from a possible dirty bombing terror attack by ISIS, Jabhat al-Nusra and other groups. World at 8. Well, at least Assad has some manners. Obama should concede and liaise with him directly. But of course both the States and us have been funding the democratic jihadi terrorists for the last few years in many countries, so this would be a U-turn, and also it would be too honest for both Obama and Cameron to consider. We have to be careful of the Saudis, don't we, as they own half of London. China's central bank said to inject $81 billion into system. China's central bank recently unveiled measures to support small rural banks and other financial institutions. China's central bank is said to be injecting 500 billion yen, which is equivalent to $81 billion, £50 billion, into the 5 biggest state-owned banks to counter slowing growth in the world's second largest economy. The People's Bank of China, PBOC, is reportedly giving each bank a $100 billion low-interest loan over 3 months. The move may be the first of several stimulus measures, analysts say. It is aimed at lifting business confidence and investment following a string of weak economic data. China's economy showed more evidence of a slowdown, with industrial production and foreign direct investment hitting multi-year lows in August. World at 8. Bloody hell. If the Chinese can't manage all the money they make from producing and selling crap to the West, and also by sending most of their criminals over as well, then what hope is there for us? Thought for the day. What happens on the res stays on the res. Now we have a salutary tale, and not one for the children. I'm taking you back a few years onto a Native American reservation of a particular native tribe called the Nashonas. Now the Nashonas were a different tribe to the main tribes in the Americas. They were classed as the Fakawi tribe by their fellow Native Americans, as they were known to prance around in the long grass of their native homeland before the reservation, waving red, white and blue feathers in the air and yelling, "Where the fuck are we?" So you see, not an easy group of natives to tie down or organise, and in fact they have never been brought under control. Thence the res. Now there came to pass a chieftain whose name was Le Griff. You must understand the French influence on these particular Indians. Now Le Griff was a mighty warrior with a lot of scalps on his belt, but he had a soft heart and helped many other warriors who would eventually turn their backs on him, speak with forked tongues and stab him through the heart from the back. Like all brave chieftains, Le Griff made mistakes. He employed and mentored many of the wrong warriors, and often did not listen to the wise advice he received from his friends in the council tipi. Thus, like Caesar, he was the root of his own demise. He was too trusting to learn that to put people in power underneath you is like putting your cloak on their shoulders. It came to pass that the great father Gitchi-Manitou gave Le Griff a place on another reservation, a much nicer res in a better area called the Urogitchis. But of course, to cut a long and sad story short, the minute that Le Griff travelled to the Urogitchis, all hell broke loose in his own Nashona tribe. All the minor tribal elders he had trusted and appointed built up their own wigwams and waited for the day when the gold from the new Urogitchis stopped coming in and then made their move. It took 5 years for them to wait, watch and make plans. The night of the long spears came and went, and to stop the killing of Ukip on the spot, his supporters in the tribe told him to go quietly, and without the normal procedure of a tribal council vote, which might offend him even more, a new chief was installed. His name was Dancing with Strings, or Attacker of Young Boys, whichever was more convenient at the time of addressing him, which was rare if at all. Behind him were the 3 remaining elders of the Nashonas, walking with sticks, or in native Icelandic Ganga Mio Prick, whose concubine was Dawn of the Dead. Then we had Fiddles with IT and Look at Me, I am important Chowley. Then the dark age for the tribe ensued. There was weeping and wailing and a renting of clothes for many days and nights. Much of the tribe felt they'd been deserted in their time of need and left with what they called the unholy quorum, with Dancing on Strings as their man of straw. It was the dark times of combined evil known as the Wendigo throughout the res, and no one was safe. Clubbings and scalpings went on, and many different scalps were hung on the council tipi, one of which was a young warrior named Kevin of the Lakes. Kevan had been a minor chieftain of the youngest section of the Braves, the young Nashonas, and he had made lots of kills and hunted for his companions. He made the big mistake of uttering words against the unholies. In essence, Kevan consulted the great and powerful www. And carved a big stone on which he said that the new tribal leadership was responsible for all the listed errors, and that he, Kevan, did not care if the tribal council were fired, resigned or killed, but which was unfortunately twisted for Kevan wanting to kill those at the top, namely Dancing with Strings. The poor young warrior was tortured with shouting and yelling by first the new Dancing with Strings and then a much harder stabbing by Walking with Sticks. These assaults carried on well into the night, and poor Kevan barely survived long enough to tell the tale. His scalp now rests on the entrance flaps of Dawn of the Dead's tipi. But Kevan told a sad story of what he had learned during his torture. You see, during the old chief's times, and despite the fact of him making many mistakes, Ukip had never tortured or put people's scalps on his tipi. In truth, he had given much gold away to elders he should not have taken under his wing or listened to, but not much is gained in hindsight but a latter day and hard acquired wisdom. Not so the new management of the Nashonas. During his torture, Kevan heard many wrong things straight from the Wendigo's mouth. It was assumed by Dancing with Strings that Kevan had said he wanted to kill the new chief. It didn't matter that Kevan did not inscribe that at all, but Dancing still kept on. How would Kevan kill him? When Kevan screamed denial, Dancing yelled that because he was now chief, he couldn't take Kevan outside the tipi and make it personal, as he knew how to deal with warriors like Kevan who opposed him. Dancing said the tribe's coffers were empty, and because of this all future hunting parties would be stopped and raiding parties would begin, targeting the elderly and infirm in other tribes. In the words of Dancing with Strings, it is more important to help an old lady with milling wheat so that she gives gold back than hunting other tribes or proclaiming the might of the Nashonas throughout the reservation. At this stage of the torture, Kevan was weakening, and seeing his weaknesses, 2 other minor chiefs appeared, Walking with Sticks and Fiddling with IT. This torture took place in the tipi of Dawn of the Dead. Walking with Sticks carried on a mutter which went along the lines of he had been elected years before the Nashonas were invented. This was repeated at intervals throughout the torture. It must be said that Kevan was under the impression that all normal work by the Nashonas was to be shelved, and all were to concentrate on building up gold reserves from the dead of their tribe. It is with this in mind that Walking with Sticks approaches the council tipi every time, doing the death dance, and his concubine holds the sheets of deer skin with the markings on them, just in case one of the old people dies suddenly. They had become a tribe of death gatherers. Fiddling with IT then carried on the torture for another 2.5 hours, about dedicating all future Nashona work to gathering in the gold, and the entire tribe was to be re-educated in the gathering of the gold from both the living and the dead. It must be said that Kevan during his time in the Young Warriors movement had brought up the www.tp markings from 100 to over 1,000 tribespeople who came from all over the res to read his words. Before being subjected to torture and scalping, Cavan was taken away from his stones and engravings as a warning, indeed as many of the Nashonas have been, prior to them being taken by the Wendigo in all its ill-gotten power. Just before the taking and torture of Cavan of the Lakes, his fellow companion Runs on Shore was also scalped, and many of the old clan were sent out to die in the wilderness outside the res. Young Kevin's fate was made the minute he opened his mouth and carved his initials on his protests. You cannot say that Cavan of the Lakes was not warned of his potential demise, as his minor tribal leader told him 2 days before he was seized that as he had not been a full-blooded member of the young Nashonas for 24 moons, he could not appeal his sentence, which gave the young man a warning of what was to come. Cavan also told an elder before his scalping that at an earlier meeting of one of the local Croatan councils that a deer parchment roll had been sent out from Lagrif, warning of things of the past and things to come, and had been read by several members of the Croatan attendees, and a great number of them voiced a private opinion that Lagrif was right in many instances. Cavan did not confess any of this to the Wendigo. One of the advisers and lawgivers whom Lagrif had taken under his wing and provided gold for many years, and titled Taking from the Eurogichi, had been given the main body of the workers of the Nashona tribe to care for. When the dark age of the Wendigo and dancing with strings took over, this taking from the Eurogichi and so-called blood brother of Lagrif took his place within the dark realms of the Wendigo and made traitorous carvings on the tribal council teepee hides, unashamed of his two-faced dealings, and spoke like the Wendigo with a forked tongue. With poor Kevan's demise and many other scalps to come, what will be the future of the Nashonas? What will they do now they cannot leave the res to spread the word of the Nashonas? What can the combined evil of the Wendigo do to create more trouble and strife within the Nashona ranks? How can the elderly members of the tribe be protected from being sent out to die in the cold and dark so they can leave their gold to the Wendigo? How can ordinary members of the tribal council be given a voice to be heard when that voice is being stifled by fear and cowardice? Will the voice of reason and right be heard over the bullying and scalping of young men like Cavan? What happens to a tribe when that tribal council seizes power by insider bullying and combined exercises in talking with a forked tongue? Is the earth supposed to move because they've got rid of an old broom? How does this statement sound? What if all the hype surrounding the replacement of a chief, all the would-be legacies, all the would-be wonders that will occur now Lagrif has gone, do not materialise? What if the tribe is left poorer than ever and the so-called ex-members of the Nashonas who should be running towards the res are in fact running away from the res? What happens on the res does not necessarily stay on the res. Life is teaching that to the Nashonas. Will they learn by it? Will they realise that the devil they know is better than the devil they don't? No, I don't think they will ever learn, which is why they are on the res in the first place. Because gold didn't matter to the Nashonas, but it does matter, and it rules the Wendigo. And finally, perks of reaching 50, or over 60, or heading towards 70. 1. Kidnappers or rapists are not very interested in you. 2. In a hostage situation you're likely to be released first. 3. No one expects you to run anywhere. 4. People call at 9 PM and ask, did I wake you? 5. People no longer view you as a hypochondriac. 6. There is nothing left to learn the hard way. 7. Things you buy now won't wear out. 8. You can eat supper at 5 PM. 9. You can live without sex, but not your glasses. 10. You get into heated arguments about pension plans. 11. You no longer think of speed limits as a challenge. 12. You quit trying to hold your stomach in, no matter who walks in the room. 13. You sing along with elevator music. 14. Your eyes won't get much worse. 15. Your investment in health insurance is finally beginning to pay off. 16. Your joints are more accurate meteorologists than the National Weather Service. 17. Your secrets are safe with your friends because they can't remember them either. 18. Your supply of brain cells is finally down to a manageable size. 19. You can't remember who's reading this list. 20. And did you notice I'm speaking loudly for your convenience? Tell this to everyone you can remember right now. And also remember, never, under any circumstances, take a sleeping pill and a laxative pill on the same night. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night.